This is a strange story, one that seems almost senseless when viewed from within by someone who lived it and suffered the consequences. Unfortunately, it's a true story that deeply affected my character, my trust in my parents, and even in the people who cared about me. In an instant, my faith in life and my dreams of a happy future crumbled all around me, burying my hopes, my dreams, and my life itself. It took me years to try to forget, and now that I've become a father with children of my own, I can see their needs and the trust they place in me. I realize I could never betray them. Instead, I would make any sacrifice to give them a life free of issues related to family and relationship conflicts. A happy childhood. My childhood was peaceful, without problems, and I was surrounded by my parents' love. I considered myself lucky to have two parents who loved each other and were invested in my future. I knew I was fortunate every time I went to the homes of some of my friends who lived with their mothers because their parents were divorced. I never had any real problems, and life was smooth. My parents were famous lawyers, and money was never an issue in my family, so I enjoyed life without worries. Perhaps in my naivete, I thought this was the glue that held my family together. My parents rarely argued, the usual things, some disagreements, sometimes with raised voices, but everything always returned to normal, and life went on peacefully. I had several friends, most of them guys, and one girl who lived next door, Alex, short for Alessandra. She grew up with me from elementary school, and we were almost always together in those years. Living only a few steps away, we had our own shortcut through the fence to visit each other's homes. We'd hang out at her house when my parents were out until late, or she'd come to mine when my mom was home. Alex was a dear friend, the best I could have, and I almost thought of her as a sister. We argued plenty of times and made up just as often. I really cared about her. As we got older, my father became quite attached to Alex. Since she was around our house all the time, he saw her almost like a daughter, given that he had always wanted one, but due to my mom's work, she hadn't felt ready to have another child. They played video games, watched sports, and even went on trips without me. I never thought much of it, assuming it was just fun bonding to make up for the daughter he never had. Relationship with Alex. When we went off to college, Alex and I lost touch. She followed her course of study while I enrolled in engineering at another university. At first, we called each other often, but then because of studies or other reasons, the calls gradually faded and we only exchanged greetings on major occasions like birthdays, anniversaries, and Christmas. Even our summer vacations were spent separately with new friends from college, so our bond weakened significantly, and we even went years without seeing each other. One day, after we had both graduated, we happened to meet at a bar where we stopped to have a drink before dinner. Honestly, I didn't recognize her at first. I was looking at her in awe, admiring her perfect figure. She was well-dressed with tasteful style, blonde hair down to her shoulders, slightly wavy, and wore lightly tinted sunglasses that added a certain charm and mystery. Perched on a stool, she was showing off two beautiful legs that peeked out from a short skirt, which perfectly highlighted her figure. I was practically devouring her with my eyes when I heard a voice I knew. "Hi Brian, it's been years. How have you been?" I just stared at her dumbfounded, and she took off her sunglasses, adding, "The only news I get about you is from your dad now and then." Wow, I felt like such an idiot. I hadn't recognized my best friend from a few years ago. "Sorry," I said. "I'm doing well, but I didn't recognize you. You've become gorgeous and look totally different from what I remember." She got down from the stool and came over, shook my hand, and hugged me like the good old days, and I recognized her embrace. Damn, she had become such a beautiful woman. We spent time together, catching up on lots of things. I learned she had graduated in law and was interning at a law firm downtown. She already knew everything about me through my father, so we mainly talked about her. It was pleasant to listen to her sweet voice, now a bit more mature. Then she said, "I have a few errands to run before dinner." She wrote down her new phone number and we agreed to talk the next day. We called each other several times, sometimes for small reasons, and finally, I decided to invite her out to dinner that evening. She accepted immediately, saying, "Finally, you managed to ask me out. You're still as clumsy as ever." I blushed, but thankfully she couldn't see it since I was on the phone. I stopped by a florist to pick up some red roses, her favorite flowers, and drove to her new address. I got out of the car and buzzed her door, and she came down almost immediately, and we hugged. Once in the car, I reached into the back seat, grabbed the roses, and handed them to her. "I remembered your favorite flowers." She was pleasantly surprised and hugged me. "Thank you for the flowers. "Are you still my sweetheart?" I replied. "Alex, I'm always your sweetheart and I'm still single." "So am I, sweetheart," she replied, laughing, and we went to dinner. We picked up our old habit of calling each other at night when we weren't together. I had told my parents that I had reconnected with Alex and we had already gone out several times. My mom was pleasantly surprised, while my dad just nodded and said, "Really?" Returning to a life with Alex. I started bringing Alex back to my place just like old times, and just like before, she and my dad would play PlayStation or card games together. I didn't notice that, gradually, the idyllic situation I had with Alex was slowly changing, but I couldn't understand why, nor could I bring myself to worry. I was at home with my family. I didn't imagine any danger. I had no idea that their friendship would eventually become the reason why my father would steal her from me. Our relationship continued without any obvious ups or downs. It wasn't as intense as in the first few weeks, but it was still good. Or at least that's what I thought. Alex and I had fun like kids and spent plenty of hours together in bed. Alex was tireless and wonderful, able to completely exhaust me but always leaving me wanting more. Her body was out of this world, even better than the models I used to admire in old Playboy magazines, and considering that she loved me, enjoyed being with me, and loved our wild lovemaking, it was an explosive combination. Although I always felt a strange sensation when I brought Alex to my house, a kind of discomfort or slight uneasiness every time my dad invited her to play PlayStation or cards with him, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was a bit jealous of my father, though I scolded myself for even thinking it. After all, how could I be jealous of my dad? He was a very fit man with a charming salt and pepper look, a handsome man. He and my mom got along well, they rarely argued. My parents were around 60 years old but looked a lot younger. I learned to control my reaction and eventually stopped thinking about it. Alex and I had been together for about a year, and after work we were inseparable. We couldn't imagine doing anything without each other. Her parents had separated years before when she was still in college, so she didn't fully know what had happened between them. Her mother once told her that one day she came home earlier than expected and found Alex's father in bed with their maid, a beautiful Mexican girl in her mid-20s, who came 3 times a week to handle the house chores. Alex's mother eventually learned that her husband's affair with the maid had been going on for months. He'd been regularly giving her gifts for her family back in Mexico, though he was actually paying her for their encounters. The maid finally gave in when he offered a substantial amount of money for each time they'd be together, so she'd been regularly coming to bed with him. If Alex's mother hadn't come home early that day, she never would have discovered her husband's betrayal. They divorced, and Alex stayed with her mother. Once she finished college, she got a job that included the use of a company apartment, and she moved, leaving her mother alone. Whenever I took Alex home to see her mom, she still used the shortcut through the fence, just like we used to as kids. Her mom thanked me many times for bringing her back. One day, my company offered me a temporary assignment in Morocco to supervise a major project, a seawater desalination plant south of Agadir. I had designed the plant, so the company wanted to see how I would perform in the field, especially as a promotion was in sight for younger engineers like me. Besides the plant, I had also planned the water distribution for the city of Agadir, its nearby villages, and irrigation for a large agricultural plain. The desalination plant, with its capacity, would solve the region's long-standing water scarcity issues. I told Alex about it, and she was thrilled about the opportunity, imagining the career growth it would bring. I also told my parents, who were happy for me. After all, it was only about 4 weeks in Morocco. I left New York a few days later. Alex and my parents accompanied me to JFK Airport, and on a private company flight with other technicians destined for different projects, I arrived in Agadir at 7 in the morning local time. After customs, a driver took me directly to the camp set up for the project, where hundreds of workers and technicians were already stationed. I was given a 20-foot container as my living quarters, a kind of trailer without wheels but on sturdy foundations. By now it was about 8 in the morning and I unpacked my things. It wasn't too bad. I had everything I needed to survive. I changed and went out to meet the other technicians. I saw a few familiar faces I had known from New York, and we greeted each other. They updated me on the project's progress and were glad to have the plant designer with them. Things would pick up speed. I held a meeting with all the technicians, answered their questions to clarify my project, and when everyone was satisfied, it was nearly noon. We went to the site's mess hall for a light lunch. Back in New York, it was still early morning, so I called home to let my parents know I had arrived safely and was already at work. To my surprise, they passed the phone to Alex, who told me that my parents insisted she stay with them since I was away. She had even slept in my bed and said she loved smelling my scent on the sheets. It made her miss me less. "I miss you so much too, my love," I told her. We talked about my trip and my new living situation before she said she had to go to work, but we'd talk again that evening when she got home. The afternoon passed quickly, busy as I was checking the completed work and planning the next stages. Prefabricated parts kept arriving on schedule, delivered by suppliers, and were expertly assembled by the workers with help from the technicians. My main concern was the excavation work to bury all the pipelines that would distribute water throughout the city. With all the construction zones, it looked like a place that had just escaped bombing. Around midnight, I called my parents again and was surprised to find Alex still there. She told me my parents had insisted she stay with them, waiting for my return. She had packed a few things and was settling into my room. Everything was as usual. My mom was asleep, and my dad and Alex were playing cards or on the PlayStation. Nothing new. Knowing Alex was with them at night actually reassured me. Brian's return. The month in Morocco passed, and I returned to New York on the same private company flight, arriving at JFK. Strangely, no one was there to greet me, though I was sure I'd informed them all, especially Alex. I waited a bit, but no one answered my calls and worry began to creep in. Was something wrong? I took a taxi home, and when I walked in I found my mother in tears, but no one else was there. She hugged me, sobbing, and told me that my father and Alex had run away together. I was speechless. My father and my girlfriend? I couldn't believe it. My mother explained that the two of them would stay up late playing cards while she slept. Then, things had changed, and Alex and my dad would make love on the couch once they were sure my mother was asleep. She'd found strange stains on the couch, and now she was certain. She showed me a note my father had left with his excuses. "Helen, I'm sorry, but Alex and I are madly in love and we can't stay. I apologized to Brian too, but unfortunately, Alex loves me now, and I've loved her since high school." Two miserable lines to shatter both my mother's and my lives. It felt like a nightmare, but it was the bitter truth. I cursed my father and my now ex-girlfriend, but I didn't cry. All I felt was anger, and in that moment, I understood the symptoms I'd been ignoring. My sixth sense had been desperately trying to warn me, but I was too blinded by childhood memories and the idea of my perfect family to believe any threat could come from my father. Divorce of my parents. I tried to console my mother, who eventually calmed down and then said, "I'm calling the lawyer to request a divorce immediately." Without hesitation, she called her law firm and asked to speak to someone in the divorce department. She explained the situation, and they told her the necessary documents would be waiting on her desk the next morning. I was stunned, but also impressed by my mother's decisive strength. As for myself, there was nothing I could do since I wasn't married to Alex. It wasn't easy to move on, and I spent many nights with stomach cramps from the anger of realizing everything had happened right before our eyes without either of us suspecting a thing. The trust that bound us together had blinded us, and both my mother and I had been betrayed by the one person we believed untouchable, the one we looked up to as our guide. My father's betrayal hurt me deeply. I managed to forget about Alex after a few months. It wasn't easy, and her memory would still come to mind occasionally, but I could control it and push it away in seconds. My father's betrayal, however, left an indelible mark on my soul and my mind. I still haven't been able to forgive him, nor can I forget it. Sometimes I feel a pain similar to what an animal might feel when it's branded. A cold shiver runs down my spine, and I feel a slight tremor even now. The end of the runaway story. For what it's worth, the relationship between my father and Alex lasted only a few months. They'd traveled through Europe almost the entire summer, then returned to New York in early September. He signed the divorce papers through his lawyers and met all of my mother's requests. The divorce was finalized in a few days. I never saw my father again. The only news I heard about him came from a few of his work colleagues whom I also knew. He was convinced he'd spend the rest of his life with Alex and had put everything on the line for her, including his betrayal and leaving his family. But one day in late October, she told him she was tired of him because she'd met a younger, more attractive man. She packed her bags, called a taxi, and left him, leaving my father in despair. A few days later, a sergeant from the New York Police Department came to our door, summoning us to identify a man who had jumped from the 6th floor of a building. My mother and I went to the police station, and in the autopsy room, we identified what looked like my father's body. Neither of us shed a tear. We only sighed with relief, hoping that maybe our nightmares and sleepless nights were finally over. My mother took care of the funeral and had him cremated, but she refused to keep his ashes. She simply said that she'd done it so she wouldn't be tempted to visit his grave. She didn't want any reminder of him. Several years later, I met my wife. The months of engagement weren't easy. Memories of my father and Alex still haunted me. This time, I sought the help of a psychologist who helped me overcome my fears, and I got married. I'm still married to Katie, and we have 2 children. I hope my marriage will be free of problems, and I'm pretty sure I'll keep her close forever. What I endured is something I never want my children to experience, and I'm confident I can protect them from it. The experience I lived through taught me lessons I'll never forget. Outro. If you've ever gone through something similar, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your stories of pain and betrayal, and let's support each other on our paths to healing. And if you're interested in more content you can relate to, check out my other video on toxic friendships. The link is in the description box.